you very much for having us today. My name is Beth Uhler. I'm a project manager at Cedarville Engineering Group, CEG. I specialize in environmental compliance, primarily MS4, also wetlands and waters regulations. We are a women-owned civil engineering firm. We also have a construction division. We do a lot of work for state and federal government, but we started out as a municipal engineering firm and continue to serve many local municipalities today. I manage our MS4 support services. We serve as municipal stormwater engineer as well as engineer of record, and I'm here with the manager of one of the great communities we work with, Jamie Gwynn.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jamie Gwynn. As Beth said, I'm the township manager for New Hanover Township in Montgomery County. Been here since the end of 2016. We brought on Cedarville a few years ago to help us streamline our PRP plan and our MS4 process in general. Want to note that we are located in the Schuylkill River watershed, not at all that far from the bay. And for the 20 attendees here and the presenters, we want to make this as practical as we can. Me being a practical manager, I know this stuff can sometimes feel like watching paint dry. So we will do our best to provide you with some easy tips to explain why this stuff's important, why it matters, and to hopefully get you in a backwards planning mindset to easily take care of this stuff now and in the future.
So as Jamie mentioned, talking about scheduling is a pretty dry topic, but it's something that is important to plan for, whether you have one project to implement over a 5-year period or multiple projects to implement over the 5-year period. That's one thing that the permit doesn't address in terms of requirements for developing your PRP. It doesn't require that you think about scheduling up front, but it's very important. And you should really be taking a look each year as you're doing your budget, refreshing that schedule, especially if you have multiple BMPs that you're implementing. So we're happy to take questions and comments throughout, but we ultimately hope to generate an open discussion and sharing of experience at the end of the presentation. Jamie's first going to share his experience with PRP project scheduling in New Hanover Township as a case study to kick off the presentation. Then I'll talk about scheduling considerations a little bit more broadly. And finally, if you were on DEP's Jamie Eberl's introduction to this session, she reviewed the revisions to pollutant reduction plan, but in case you weren't, we also have it in our presentation today.
All right, well, thanks, Beth. So when I got here at the end of 2016, leading into 2017, we had a different firm helping us with our MS4 requirements. I certainly knew about MS4 when I became a manager. I did not know what this acronym PRP really stood for, but our planner at the time said that when we do our new 5-year permit, that this is going to be something that we have to do. So when we got our renewed permit, our planner kind of went through some of the options that we could do. At first, we had 2 or 3 options, but we didn't really look at them in depth in 2017 as we were going through the permit process. So when we brought in Cedarville in 2018, we had Beth kind of look at a feasibility study to see if those options still made sense. And as we got through 2018, 2019, we got, how many, Beth? Was it like 10 to 15 new options? Or
it was a handful of new options. But the I wanted to introduce to start with, to review why this was important, and why the PRP was important. Jamie wanted to emphasize that as well.
Oh, I want to emphasize it's important because it's never going away. Like the nightmare you'll never wake up from. And look, I can say that stuff as a manager because I have to deal with it all the time on top of other things. We know it's certainly good for everything we have to do with our environment and etc. But it will be something, if you don't take care of up front and plan well, it will become a nightmare scenario for you as you get into year 4 and year 5, because I'm convinced it takes longer than 2 years to kind of really plan from start to finish on this.
Right. And so not only is it not going away, and it is a requirement, but it's important to kind of shift the mentality, which I think that many municipalities and managers are, that embracing that it's not going away and viewing it as an opportunity to complete meaningful projects in your local communities and improve your local water quality. In addition to, if you're located within the bay, improving the ecological health of the bay as well. And so I'm sure many people that are in this session have enjoyed visiting some of the beautiful spaces in the Pennsylvania Bay watershed. And my family has as well. And these are some pictures from Kelly's Run, Trout Run in Lancaster County, and Muddy Creek in York County. So I just wanted to kind of emphasize that Jamie has the practical manager perspective, and the shifting of the mindset to implementation and looking at it as an opportunity, and improving our local water quality.
Yeah, and that's Beth, that's why we're tag teaming together, because you have, whether there's elected officials or managers that see this, sometimes this takes a lower priority than our other things, but it is a very important priority. That's why we hope we can just kind of navigate it for you a little bit easier.
Okay, now dive on into the New Hanover case study.
Okay, so can I go back to the timeline?
The timeline, yeah, do it.
No, yeah. So I was asking Beth, we had, I think, 3 options before you came on board, and then we streamlined all of our MS4 stuff through you guys. When we did that feasibility study, I think we came to like 5, 10, or 15 new options. So when we looked at those options, at first it felt overwhelming because there's a lot of different choices you have to make. We have as we'll kind of get through a little bit more, we have a highly functioning environmental advisory board. So we kicked it to them, let them review, let them make a recommendation. We kind of narrowed it down, and then we gave it to our board. Our board went with an option, and we're kind of going to go through how we're here today. But the thing I want to just streamline for now, because we're going to get through all this stuff a little bit, well, a lot more in detail, is it starts with the backwards planning. So we know that we have to do it by January 31st, 2024. So it's, how do we backwards plan from that date to get it in, construct it, complete it by at some point mid 2023, just to buy us a little bit more time if we have any hiccups. So just starting from that date going backwards, we know we have to do a ton of stuff from conception to implementation.
Okay. So generally speaking, I want to go back to this slide too. New Hanover has a very small burden in terms of the PRP requirement compared to many municipalities. The circle that you see there is the urbanized area, is the hatched area. This is just a screenshot from the DEP web map app. And then the red impaired stream, basically the orange circle is the discharges. It's about 4 outfalls that discharge to an impaired stream within an urbanized area. So in terms of having this requirement, in comparison to other municipalities, very fortunate that it's not the entire township and not multiple impaired streams and not within everything within the Bay watershed. They don't have the additional appendice requirement. But that doesn't mean that the approach is any different for it. We had this slide up earlier with the original BMP options. I just want to comment, Jamie, that was a good thing to have BMP options in your PRP. I don't know how many people have that, but basically including more than you're required to have in your PRP, and having that approved so that you then have the opportunity to go back and have the option to select what BMP you want to go with without having to go through the revision process through DEP.
And we actually, and we did ours twice. I mean, we had our original one, and then we had to revise it before you guys came along. So we had to go through our PRP approval process twice, and then do the feasibility study. So it takes a long time to get all that stuff just to that point. Right,
to that point. So then, the township wanted to take another look at those options again before moving forward with it, because like many municipalities, it's a big step and a financial commitment to do projects of this nature. So taking a look at the original BMP options that were in the in the PRP and then identifying 4 new options and ultimately coming up with the final recommendation, which was the stream restoration on township-owned property. And there are actually reasons for that. One of the big reasons is the township-owned property factor, and that's what the township decided to go with. So Jamie can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we had a number of options, and thinking, with the community is when we looked at all the options that Cedarville had provided us, we had options that we can do on publicly owned property, and we had options that we could do on privately owned property. I always want to make sure we get the best value, as we all do, for our dollar. And I've just been through experiences where when you have private property owners, there's 2 things I worry about as a manager. The first thing is getting buy-in from them to be a part of this process. And then 2, which I think might be the more important one, Beth, is ensuring that the private homeowner is actually implementing this. And I think that was a big concern for us as we're going through the process is, sure, we can build these BMPs on private property, but what if that property owner doesn't hold up their end of the bargain? Or what if they sell their property and the next person doesn't know how to do something? So we want to make sure that whatever we did, it was a lasting effect. And we thought that we'd have a better time avoiding those 2 scenarios if we honed in on public property. So that's how we did with the public property. The second part of what we were really thinking about when we were selecting the BMP option is what's the end goal? How much do we have to do? We have to do a 10% reduction. So was there 1 project that can get us there? Was there 2 projects that can combine and get us there? So I didn't want to do 3 or 4 projects that would get us above 10%. I want to get to the 10% because, again, in New Hanover, it's about education too. This is the first time that we're all going through this. So I wanted to make sure we all understood it because, again, the next cycle we're going to have to do this again, right, Beth? So I want to make sure we have other options as well to be able to do that. So, and I think, what did we come up with? Just the Swamp Creek stream restoration. We were able to do it all in one, right?
Right. Actually, it's a 100 linear foot project is the minimum length required to achieve their PRP objectives. And so, as part of our option evaluation, we recommend a feasibility study. 100 linear feet of stream may not be practical with a stream of this size, and so that would have been the next step. And but before we proceeded, Jamie presented it, to basically publicly 2 times to get input on this BMP selection.
Yeah, so we have 5 members on our EAB board, and I'll invite anybody if you want to come to one of our boards. It's very impressive to watch how this board works in the community. They're always looking for grants. They're always looking for any avenue in order to help out the community, retrofitting basins, the like. So our EAB was the perfect avenue and board to kind of review all these options. And Beth was on a call with them, and they provided these recommendations, which then I took to the board of supervisors. We went through all the stuff again, and then we essentially honed in on what our recommendation was. And then we turned around, and then we gave it to Beth to kind of give us, what's it called, a PRP plan?
So we went with we didn't have to make any revisions to the PRP because that was already included as an option, which was great. That was another benefit of using this Swamp Creek stream restoration. But we recommended a feasibility study, not only to, you're only required to do 100 linear feet of stream restoration, not only to get a feel for what would be a practical length, but also to make sure that it meets the qualifying requirements that DEP summarized in the considerations for meeting stream restoration, whatever it's called, document that's based off of the Chesapeake Bay expert panel reports. We want to make sure that a stream restoration in this area is feasible in that regard, and as well as to streamline the timeline moving forward. It kind of just sets the stage, especially with a project that involves permitting and things like that, to continue the timeline in a streamlined fashion. So the next steps included meeting. Go ahead, Jamie.
And it wasn't the cheapest option, was it?
No, it wasn't the cheapest option. But in terms of, bang for your buck, I hate to say that over and over again, the township owned property, not having to revise the PRP. I know a lot of times that revising the PRP is kind of downplayed, but it's another step and another delay, and also consultant time to do so. So it does end up adding up. So yeah, it wasn't the cheapest, and in terms of cost.
Well, and I mentioned that because the disconnect sometimes between when you look at PRPs and MS4 and communities, at least from my perspective, is managers look at this and go, what's the cheapest way I can get to the end goal? And that's a fair question. But when we were looking at this, we want to see what would be the thing that we had the most value on. And that's kind of how we came to this. But I can't recall the numbers on it, Beth. Do you have the cost just so we can share with people kind of how much stuff this, this can cost?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for the 100 linear feet, assuming that would be feasible, that we haven't completed the study yet. We're in the process of it. There was a wide range of $100,000 to $200,000 depending on the scope of the particular project. So it can be pretty expensive when you're adding linear feet. You typically add, cost incrementally, but the initial project is gonna be expensive. However, stream restoration projects are very, very good at reducing sediment and very efficient. So the project itself, I mean, I would say that the other options added together came to similar cost-wise, but the fact that there would have to be multiple projects involved, that is more time-consuming both for township staff as well as consultant time. So
so I'll give them easy tip number one, Beth, is when you get this PRP process to start in MS4, do you either take care of the process internally or externally? Do you keep it in-house or do you outsource it? In New Hanover Township, we gave it to Beth, and we said, thank you, Beth, for doing this for us and guiding us, because look, we have one project, and you'll see how much work goes into one project. I'm sure Beth is going to have a slide with, how they organize other municipalities when they have multiple projects. It's something that you have to make sure it gets done, but it's thorough enough where we felt it was best to outsource it. So that would be easy tip number one, is to determine which one works for you.
Okay. So this is where we are currently in PRP implementation. We are trying to wrap up the feasibility study and identifying the next steps and getting a better feel for the cost estimate, because if it's not 100 linear feet that we're doing, if we should be doing 300 linear feet as the absolute minimum that makes ecological and practical sense, then the cost is going to increase as well. So those are some things to consider. The next steps that would be recommended as part of the feasibility study is meeting with DEP, both 105 and MS4 staff, as kind of a pre-application meeting to make sure that both departments are on board with the project approach, the design approach, make sure that it will count for MS4. I know there are some considerations or concerns from DEP's perspective that stream restoration projects are designed in accordance with the requirements. So we want to make sure that we coordinate up front and get everybody on board. And then proceed with design and permitting and look at grant application after that. So here's kind of just your overall timeline summary of what one project in New Hanover Township and how much time it's taken to get through the process. And I don't know if you have anything else to add in terms of
let me kind of add my approach. I don't know if people have went through this process before, in not for PRP but for other ways, but this is how I approach anything from a PRP implementation to any type of project we'll do that needs to go out to bid, gets designed, gets permitting, etc. So I'm a big believer that if you have shovel-ready projects, your odds of getting grants are significantly higher than people who don't have shovel-ready projects, especially in an age of a pandemic where funds are becoming limited. my belief has increased on that. So we're blessed to have a little bit of cash flow where we can design and pay for items to be done before we go out. But this is one of those, when I always start, it's a want or a need. This is a need. You're always going to have to do this. So I think this slide with this timeline summary may be, if I may, easy tip number 2. So I always backwards plan from construction. So you'll notice that I have that we have 2023 on there. We didn't put 2024 because our deadline's at the end of January. I would recommend you do not wait until January of 2024 to think about this stuff. So I always, again, try to make it in 2023 in this slide. In my mind, I'm just thinking end of June, early July, just in case there's anything else I need to do, paperwork or what have you, along with Beth. So just buy some time. Backwards planning, I want to see if we can get some grant funds in order to offset the cost of this, and I want to do that every single time. But before I get that grant, I need to design and permit this entire project. So notice that we went through our PRP, we got our feasibility study. Beth is finalizing all the costs associated with the plan that we chose. So we built in the entire 2020. It was really more like the end of 2019 and the entire 2020 to actually select the options we were doing. And then now that we have it with Beth's plan, we're going to go to the design and permitting phase. After that, which is going to take some time. And then, again, we'll get our permits and then we'll go for grants. The other thing I want to mention about the grants, notice how I put it in 2022. If we do not get the grant in 2022, we give ourselves the option to go after the grant in 2023. That is a luxury here, and we've had actually a traffic signal in our township where we didn't get grants the first year, and then we got $500,000 in the second year just because we were a little bit more patient with it. And again, the 5-year timeline, if you do it right, you're going to be able to buy yourself some patience on that. So we built in 2 years where we can go get grants, and if we don't get it in the first year, we could certainly in the second year argue that it's still important to us and hopefully get it. And if we didn't get it in 2 years, at least our residents know that we tried. So that is essentially easy tip number 2 is to backwards plan. And if you have not started your PRP plan now, it is only the beginning of 2021. You still have time to get that in there. It's going to take you probably longer than 2 years if you haven't started. So I would start on that now.
That's good advice. And I think in terms of grant application, I think I want to just emphasize that that's happened to us in other communities as well, where you might apply for a grant the first time around, not successful. And the second time you apply for the grant, you are successful. So, I mean, it shows the grantor that you're serious about the project, and you'd like to think that you're moving up in the queue as you apply. So, don't be deterred if you apply one time and aren't successful. You may be successful the second time. So try to build that into your timeline. And I'm going to, yeah.
Beth, I just want to, if you can go back one slide, for the grants, easy tip number 3 is what I've learned as a manager is there are municipalities that want to do grants in-house or outsource them. Whenever you get something technical like a PRP, I'd recommend whoever is doing your design for it, let them do your grant application. It's only a few $1,000s, but it's so technical from start to finish. It'll be done right, instead of having what usually falls on the admin assistant to figure out this grant, and then they're going to call the person who designed it anyway and spend the same amount of money. So I've learned through experience that just providing the grant, especially a technical one, to whomever's designing it is will save you the cost and the aggravation long term.
Cool. Okay, so after Jamie has shared the experience in New Hanover, maybe you guys are in a similar process. Maybe you were able to learn something from that exact example, but we thought it would be helpful to provide kind of some more generic, I don't want to say generic, but some more broad project scenarios if you're already diving into implementing BMPs in your pollutant reduction plan. So I tried to pick an example of a project that would be one of the longest timelines, just to give you an idea of how much overall time to plan for these types of projects, but a stream restoration on private property is going to be one of the longer timeframes that you're looking at. The advantages, of course, are that you typically will get a higher amount of pollutant reduction credit for a stream restoration project. But if it's on private property, you're looking at landowner coordination and commitment. And let's just say this is for a stream restoration that's 1,000 linear feet or less. If you're looking at an individual private property owner, you may luck out and actually, be able to get them to sign on very quickly, but you may not be able to. This process could be simple or difficult. And I think that anyone who has experience with coordinating with projects on private land can agree it's rarely quick and easy. So this estimate can easily eat up more of your timeline if you have to wait for homeowners association board meetings to move forward with your project, which sometimes only meet a couple times a year. Feasibility studies are important to do so that you have something to present to agencies when you have a pre-application meeting. I like to have a pre-application meeting early on in the process, and it may be necessary to follow up and have another pre-application meeting as you get closer to permitting. Then you're looking at 12 to 18 months for design and permitting for 105 permitting, as well as if you're over an acre, you might have to have over an acre of earth disturbance, that is, you might have to go for an MPDS permit. So that can be a decent time frame. And in terms of applying for and obtaining grant funding, it could be 6 to 12 plus months, depending on what grant program you're looking at to actually from application submittal. Oh, I'm sorry.
I say because you have to time them.
Yeah.
You might have a grant that you got to wait 11 more months to apply for, and then you got to wait another 9 months to hear an answer about.
Right, and if you're not looking to spend money on construction until you actually hear of the grant award, then you're just basically sitting on your project without moving forward for that that amount of time. So overall, looking at this project, you're looking at 2 to 4 years of time for one stream restoration on a private property. So that just goes to show you have a 5-year implementation period. You need to get started as soon as possible, especially if you have multiple projects.
So Beth, if someone, because we don't have 5 years at this point, if someone were to start tomorrow, how would your timeline look if someone started tomorrow, or what would you recommend off the cuff?
Well, it really depends on, everybody has a different implementation time period right now. Yours happens to be January 31st, 2024. There are tons of municipalities in the Southeast region whose 5-year period hasn't even started yet. Okay. I think that most of the municipalities, and I guess correct me if I'm wrong, in the Bay, Lancaster County, where the target audience is for this forum, I think the majority have had their PRPs approved, so they might be already in the middle of implementation. So, yeah, I mean, if you haven't started, if you have a stream restoration project on private property and you haven't started anything yet, and you're on year 2 or 3, it would be in your best benefit to begin to go down through this list. Or the alternative is maybe you need to either coordinate with DEP to see what your options are, or look at revising your PRP for some project types that may be more streamlined to meet your implementation deadline. I chose this as an example of a more streamlined project schedule. If you may not be able to get as much credit for a basin retrofit, you may get a decent amount of credit. This is just to show the example of how much time it could take. Your time is decreased significantly due to eliminating the coordination with the private property owners and permitting for a basin retrofit on municipal property. Funding is always going to take a long time. If your project isn't dependent on outside funding, lucky you, you could easily accomplish this project in a half a year to a year. So just to give you an idea of what to plan for if you have basin retrofits in your PRP, it's a very approximate time frame. But it gives a little bit of an idea if you haven't started thinking about it. And then general overall considerations, basically funding. Funding takes time. landowner coordination. We've emphasized that that takes time. If you have over an acre of earth disturbance and have to get an MPDS permit, if you have to have a 105 permit because of stream restoration or impacts to stream or wetlands, that's going to take time. If you have a board or council that wants to provide input along every step of the way, and you have to wait to present updates at board meetings before proceeding to different phases of the project, that's going to take time. Utility conflicts. This doesn't typically come into play with basin retrofits, but stream projects it may. If you're used to implementing capital projects, you should already have vast experience with this. But utility conflicts, coordinating with utilities can take a lot of time. We had a project where we were installing infiltration beds underneath a low volume township roadway, and we had to coordinate with every major utility to ensure that we were not going to be impacting with them. Just scheduling and meeting with them took probably 6 months at least. And then we still had straggling coordination with PICO on an actual conflict. So that's going to take time. And then it could result in major design changes, which also takes time. Anything that can affect your schedule can impact the budget. Generally, if you maintain the project schedule that you set out to do, which we recommend when you first start, don't just dive into it. Even if you're hiring a consultant to do this, you should still be aware and ask them to provide you a schedule up front to make sure that they maintain the budget and that there aren't add-ons and change orders as you're moving forward. Sure, there are unforeseen circumstances that can come up, but you want to make sure that you try to identify them early and often so you can avoid those unforeseen circumstances as much as possible. There are many other considerations in terms of project schedule, and these are kind of just the major ones that I wanted to mention to give attention to very early on in the process. And we talked about how New Hanover had one project to implement, and that seems kind of intensive in terms of planning the schedule out in order to meet your 5-year period if it's a stream restoration. This is an example of a municipality that we work with that has to implement by the end of, I think it's December 2024. The 2020 is just passed because they didn't have time to put anything into the budget for that year. So what we end up having here is basically 7 basin retrofits and 2 stream restoration projects that need to be implemented in a 4-year period of time, 4.5-year period of time. It is intensive from a scheduling perspective, but also maybe very challenging to meet from a budgeting perspective. So if your pollutant reduction plan looks at all anything like this, get it started right away. And, from a practicality standpoint, this schedule needs to be reviewed and updated annually, as well as the cost estimates for take a look at them every year for your PRP, so that you're you can adequately plan moving forward, because this, even though it's populated, this is going to be a challenge for any municipality to meet this requirement. It's actually part of our assistance for this municipality this year is to take the schedule and delve into it even more, and provide more detail on it moving forward for the township to be able to implement and hopefully meet their timeline. Otherwise, it will be contacting DEP to see if there are any alternatives. And then again, if you're up against the timeline at the end where you're supposed to implement by 2024, you might have to revise your pollutant reduction plan. If you had heard Jamie Eberl's introduction to this session, she mentioned there are minor revisions and major revisions. A major revision is basically a change in project type or location or anything that may affect your calculations. And anything that changes those 3 items would have to coordinate with DEP. So you want to reach out to your regional office and make sure that they are make sure that you actually do have to submit, and it's a major revision, not a minor revision. Update your calculations, and you might be able to submit it as an addendum to your report, or you might want to just update your entire report. You might also have to go through public involvement and participation if it is changing the project type, location, or calculations. And then submit the updated info to PADEP for approval. So while it's possible, it's not, your PRP is not set in stone, there's still a decent amount of work that needs to go into updating it, depending on what exactly needs to be revised. And as mentioned earlier, it's hindsight now, but if your municipality happened to incorporate BMP options into your pollutant reduction plan, if you had the luxury of that, because some municipalities were struggling to find locations for BMPs anywhere, that would have been an ideal situation to avoid having to go back to revise your pollutant reduction plan. So that's all we have for you all today. Does anybody have any questions? I'm sorry we kind of ran really up to the end of the session time here.
No, that's okay, Beth. We do have a couple of minutes left for questions. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat box and we'll have Jamie and Beth address those. I did want to recap the tips, the easy tips that I heard. First of all, bring in outside help if you need it. Backwards plan or begin with the end in mind, which I thought was an excellent suggestion. Draw on outside technical resources for grant applications and so forth. Meet with permitting agency staff early and often, another real good suggestion. Keep your project options open. And then the last one I heard was allow yourself plenty of time on selecting and implementing projects. Did I miss any, Jamie and Beth?
I think that was good. I think that was a good summary of the takeaways. I think another point would be is that don't get to sway, apply for grant applications, multiple times if you have to, and if you have the luxury of the time to do it. Do you have anything, Jamie?
Just how many tips do I have? 2, so I need one more. I mean, easy tip 3 is you can call Beth after this and see if you can build a couple of your projects.